Hello, welcome back live to Westminster. You're watching The Take. Well, we can turn now to the other really significant story of the day. And NATO says that it thinks a missile that landed in Poland, killing 2 people, is likely to be from Ukrainian air defences. Now, that view has been disputed by Ukraine, but following a huge barrage of attacks across Ukraine, it, of course, has further ratcheted up the tensions between the West and Russia, with talk of invoking Article 4 of the NATO treaty. Well, we can speak now to Lord Peter Ricketts, the former National Security Advisor and Foreign Office Permanent Secretary. Thank you so much for being with us. NATO say the missile is likely Ukrainian. Ukraine are disputing that. What is your sense?
Well, I think the most important point is that this incident only happened because Ukraine had been under this massive bombardment by the Russians against their civilian infrastructure. So that, I think, is the most important thing that was happening yesterday. Whoever fired this missile, it was only because of that. If it was a Ukrainian missile, which looks more and more likely, it was because they were firing in self-defense against this incoming barrage of Russian missiles. So I'm sure the experts will tell us pretty quickly, one way or the other, whose missile it was. But the bigger background is that this is one of the dangers, one of the things that happens when Russia behaves like this, going to war with a neighbouring country.
Of course, Poland is a member of NATO. Is this the kind of thing that could trigger a NATO response?
It's worth just remembering what Article 4 and Article 5 are about. Article 4 of the NATO treaty is consultations. That's effectively what's been happening today. The NATO Council met, they pooled information, they expressed solidarity with Poland, and they said they'd keep in close touch with events. Article 5, I mean, if a member state feels it's under an armed attack, and that's the criterion, an armed attack, then NATO members have agreed to act collectively. But the NATO treaty, it's a political treaty. It's not a legal commitment. And each nation is free to decide what kind of support it can give. So it doesn't put you on an escalator to, inevitable military conflict, but it is a collective defense vehicle. Now, if this was an errant Russian missile that went astray and hit Poland, that's hardly a deliberate armed attack on Poland. It would be a very different thing if the Russians made a deliberate attack on a Polish military installation. Then we really would be into issue of how NATO would respond militarily.
It's interesting, isn't it? Do you feel that because of the alliance and the consequences that could have, that Russia is, I guess, holding back slightly when it comes to other countries other than Ukraine?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think Putin, he's megalomaniac about Ukraine, but he understands the power of NATO and this power of deterrence, that if he does deliberately attack a NATO state, there will be an armed response from NATO. I think there's no doubt about that. And he's got no doubt about that. Ukraine, of course, is not a member state of NATO. It's a close partner. It's being supported by NATO, but it doesn't benefit yet from that collective guarantee, which effectively says you attack a member of NATO and NATO will come back at you very hard. That has worked so far. That red line has been respected by the Russians, assuming that this was not a deliberate attack by Russia on Poland, which I really don't think it was.
I was reflecting a bit earlier today about, the war in Ukraine, about all the appalling images that we've seen, about all the discussions, that we've had and the kind of international discussions as well. And just thinking how I just cannot really see a way out of it, frankly, right now. Is there any path that you can see for an end to the war?
Well, I think you're right. I hear talk about people saying there's got to be a negotiated solution, there's got to be a peace settlement here. I mean, I don't think that after all they've been through, the Ukrainians are about to do a deal with Russia, which leaves Russia in possession of some of their territory. Nor do I think Putin is about to do a complete unconditional withdrawal for all his troops. So I'm afraid what this is going to head up to is a stalemate over the winter, where more or less in the position the forces are now, and then probably more fighting next year. I guess in the end, some sort of armistice or truce, a bit like we've had in Korea for the last 70 years, where there is a line of separation, which is overseen by international peacekeeping forces, but neither side have accepted that they've won or lost, and there is no durable peace. That's the most likely outcome I can see from this. It's not a good one for Europe or for Ukraine, but it's certainly better for Ukraine, than if the Russians had succeeded in their original objective.
Yeah, some difficult analysis to hear, but I do, accept the kind of, I guess, accuracy of what you're saying. Lord
It's a
Ricketts,
kind of,
always
yeah.
good to talk. Thank you very
Thank you very
much
much.
for being on the programme.